Gerilynn, one of the things that I've seen in the industry, and you and I talked a little bit about this, is people, younger people in particular, end up at companies. They end up in some kind of marketing administrative seat, and then they get what I say thrown to the fire. Someone comes in their office and is like, hey, need someone to handle these trade shows, need
Put on a
someone to
show.
coordinate this. Yes. And they're like, go.
Yeah.
And I've always said, I think it's extremely unfair. I think there is a huge knowledge gap. I think there's a lot of investment into events. So it's a huge spend, right? You're on display for your peers, what gets put together. So how does that relate to kind of your story? And then now, like, do you think that's a unique thing I'm describing, or it happens more so often than not?
I think it happened. I think what you're describing is the majority. And
Okay.
I think it's because event marketing is a very niche industry. It's kind of like, there's a lot of doctors, but somebody is a cardiologist or podiatrist or a neurosurgeon,
Yeah.
whatever. So it's just very niche. So it's not like most people grow up and say, oh, I want to grow up and be an event marketer. It's usually well, first of all, there's so many aspects of marketing that so when people are in college, they don't really understand. There's digital and social and brand marketing and all kinds of marketing. And then within event marketing, there's also, you could work for a nonprofit, you could work for a corporation, you could work for an agency, you
Mhm.
could work for experiential marketing, you could work in festivals or music, so there's a lot to it. And the average person is not aware of how broad it is. So for me, I started in event marketing, and that is the only thing I've ever done.
Mhm.
So with me, the challenge to myself is always when I change industries, I need to understand the industry. So I started in pharmaceuticals, I moved to sports and entertainment, I then moved to consumer goods, and then this is my first stint in technology. So my journey has always been learning the industry, but I have picked up many, many, many marketing skills along the way, such as, digital marketing, social media, search engine optimization, every kind. So part of me feels that if somebody starts out as a true marketer and has that strong foundation, that's a good thing. You know, any skill that you get and bring forward is a good thing. No, so it's kind of like you could come at things from different ways. So I don't think there's a good or a bad. I do think like until you said it, I didn't realize like, ooh, to be thrown into something that you don't really know, that would be kind of hard because it is a very visible role. There's a lot of pressure involved. There's a lot of thinking on your feet, a lot of just reacting in a good way or having to react in a quick and efficient way. So I couldn't say if there's a better or worse, but I would say that every skill you get in your career is something you can use in an event marketing role. I don't know if
Yeah.
I.
So no, you did. It's great. I think part of the reason I've come to this conclusion is because, these people that we're talking about as event marketers, they've been my client for 12 years.
Right.
And what we've started learning is like you start seeing people in the seat that are brand new. And man, I can only imagine the pressure of like, oh, by the way, the CEO is going to show up at this trade show booth. I mean, you're only 25 and you've
Right.
never done this before,
Right.
and no one gave you any blueprint. You don't even know what the objectives are of
Yeah.
being here. But that $250,000, by the way, it's a big spend. I just think it's
Yeah. It's on you.
of
It's on you.
a
You're going to
lot
do
of
it.
pressure.
Yeah.
Yep. And I think, what are your thoughts on the idea is I think a lot of people have to learn the ins and outs of event, the coordination, the planning, that whole piece. What do you think is the evolution and the shift into becoming more of like an event marketer, right? Where you're thinking from a strategic standpoint and you have kind of the planning and execution dialed in. How
I
long does that take? What is the transformation like?
Well, I mean, I think you're always learning. There's always things that at least for myself. I mean, I am always picking up stuff from other people, different ways of doing things. I mean, in marketing, we don't call it copying, we call it leveraging. So, I mean, I'm always leveraging
Yeah.
what's gone before me or somebody has done better than I do. And that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's a compliment. I think there are certain innate qualities that all event marketers should have. And I don't mean to sound discouraging, but if you're not an organized thinker, this might not be the industry for you. because you have to be strategic in your long-term planning. You have to be able to prepare for any eventuality. And, I always say it's not enough to have a plan A or a B. I usually have a plan H because so many things can happen, especially with the advent of technology, that we are so dependent on that. And if that were to go out, I hate to say it, but you're screwed. I mean, you
Yeah.
have got to make sure you are constantly planning and thinking for what could happen, what could come. So I think organization in your mind and in how you operate is key. I think being strategic and being able to see down the road 15, 4 months, 6 months, 18 months, just because our runway is very long a lot of times. And also because sometimes our runway is really short and you have to be able to say, okay, somebody throws something over the fence to you and says, okay, this trade show is going to be put on in 6 weeks. And normally you have a much longer runway, but and I always look at it and go, okay, what are the essential things? The things like the message and the promotion that take you've got to let build. So that's something you don't have time for, but with a 6 week runway. But you do have time to make sure that your booth space is effective, what you can do with it. You have the time to make sure all your pieces get there, your trade show booth. I mean, there's so many things that I always say time is your friend and it's a benefit. Well, we don't always have that, but being organized will help to mitigate some of these other things that will pop up.
Yeah, so two things you said there is I really like the idea of breaking it down into time and basically saying like time only allows you to do what you can do,
Yep.
right? So you can, if you have a short runway, you have to get the basics, you have to get the
Yep.
planning, you have to get the coordination. And when it comes to strategy and understanding the bigger picture of what's going on at these events, is you do need more runway, you do need
Yep.
more time, you do need more planning. You had mentioned earlier about being a lifelong learner, right?
Yep.
Always learning, taking from people. I love that. I feel that way. I feel like I just constantly rip people off all the time. Like I hear something, I'm like, I'm using that, right? All the time. So what is something that, maybe an example or story like in your life, recent past, where you've gotten advice or you've kind of taken something from someone where they gave you a tip idea that you've used that really worked out well?
There's so many. It's crazy because and there were certain things with event marketers that, after 25 years, I wish I had a silver bullet. I don't. I don't have
Hmm.
the answer to things. Two of the things that I constantly struggle with, and I'm always looking for advice. So people in the chat, if you have, thoughts, please shoot them my way. The two things that I still struggle with is, KPIs and measuring metrics, event metrics. It is a very difficult thing to measure, and it's become more and more and more important. And personally, I like that because I like to be held accountable. I don't like to do things just to do them or just because they've always been done. I like them to mean something. And so that's one area. And I don't know if it's difficult because some metrics are very intangible. They're meaningful, but they're intangible. Like people could, you could have had 5,000 booth scans and people were coming to your booth. And so that's a good anecdotal measure. But you also then have to look at it and go, okay, was I giving away, free coffee? Was I giving away an iPhone, 15? Why was I attracting so many people? So I think that's one of the hardest things for me with the lead follow through. The other thing is in a company like HPE, we're so big and matrix that you're relying on other people and other processes. And if something stops in the process, a bottleneck occurs and it's difficult to get the end result. So that's one thing I struggle with. The other thing I struggle with, and I think I just was having this conversation with an early career because she was like, she calls me Miss Gerilynn because she's somebody I knew from my neighborhood. She's one of my friend's children. She's like, Miss Gerilynn, how do you get people to come to your events? And I said, Mia, that is one of the most difficult things. Audience acquisition is so difficult. And when you're doing like, let's just say a Masters or a Kentucky Derby, like people like us on the phone, if somebody said, "Oh, hey, Gerilynn, you want to go to the Kentucky Derby?" I'd like, hell yeah, count me in. Somebody asked me to
Mhm.
go see YouTube at the Sphere in Vegas, and I was like, I mean, it didn't even take me 2 seconds to respond.
Sure. Yeah.
But the people that we're inviting to all these things, they are people that get invited to everything. They're C-level people.
Mhm.
And it's really difficult to differentiate yourself in this market in a way that would attract that audience. So that's something I am always looking to others. I'm looking at the industry. I look into, some current events to see how I can motivate and how and what I can leverage to be
Yeah.
successful in these areas because those are two areas that are integral to any event marketer. Measurement of results and audience acquisition. That's the
Mhm.
foundation.
And
So
just so you know, I think just so you know, KPIs, event measurement, getting people to show up and get in the booth or your event or whatever it may be, and then internal bottlenecks at big companies are all things that people talk about that are like, yes, this is a struggle at
the
times.
struggle is real. It
Yeah,
is real.
they're
Yeah.
difficult.
Yep.
It's not an easy piece of what an event marketer has to do,
And
right?
you could be
In their
as
grand scheme.
organized and strategic as you can be, and it's still not easy. So for
No.
anybody out there that's struggling with it, the struggle is real.
One of the things I was noticing from the sessions that I was attending that I really enjoyed, but I was missing the piece of, was they were telling us as the audience how to do things on a grand scale. They were showing things they were doing with a $250,000 budget, or they were showing amazing things that they were doing. And I thought, I know that some of this is reproducible on a small scale. I
Mhm.
know that we can take some of that and scale it to my budget. I don't have a $250,000 budget per event. I don't even
Yeah.
have one event that's that big, but I know that there are parts. And that's what I started doing. I started making notes about what parts I could scale down. And I kept hoping that when they talked about these big events, they would also mention, now, if you're doing a smaller event, consider doing it this way to make it work. If you're doing a smaller footprint, consider doing it this way to make it work. And they would have ideas. If I raised my hand and asked, how would you do that on a different scale? They would have answers. And I thought, why aren't you telling me that to begin with? Why do I have to ask the question? And so I thought, well, it's probably because, quite honestly, the exhibit houses, and you know this, are working on those large scales. There are very few exhibit houses that get called to do 10 by 10s. They're doing 20 by 20s and larger. So the people like me that are doing 10 by 10s are buying a piece of graphic and reusing it. And honestly, it's a lot of fun to hear about the big giant stuff. And it's more exciting. For instance, if you watch the Super Bowl, that's a lot more exciting to watch than if you're watching somebody's T-ball or Pee-wee football game. Unless it's your kid, you're not spending Saturday out at the field watching someone else's kid play Pee-wee football. So it's just
Yeah.
kind of that type of scaling it down.
No, I get that completely. And I think one of the reasons I like the topic is because I agree with you. I feel like in our industry, everybody shows off the big work,
Mhm.
everything, no knock on exhibitor, but like all the work they put in their magazine is, what's the budget? $1 million. Great.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to say it's hard to screw up $1 million budget on the trade show floor because I'm sure people could do it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that's the minority.
Mhm.
The majority are people in 10 by 10, 10 by 20, and even 20 by 20s and 20 by 30s and 20 by 40s that don't get talked enough. Your run-of-the-mill average exhibitor on the floor,
Mhm.
they're not ADT, right? They're not the
Right.
big name that's
Yeah.
going to be able to move weight. So how do you take these strategies, these experiential ideas, like
Mhm.
theming and things, and how do
Yeah.
you give people strategies in a 10 by 10 to 20 by 20, whatever it may be, just your smaller average exhibitor? I think it's a great topic. So let's go into the first class I really want to talk about is your adding value to sponsorships, because I think it's
Mhm.
a really cool conversation. I've been an advocate for a long time. I look at a lot of the sponsorships that are available through our clients and through even
Yep.
our own. And I feel like it's a lot of the same stuff. And then I
Yep.
also feel like unfortunately, I think there's a lot of meaningless kind of junk in there that
Yeah.
they try to get you to pay for. So I've talked a lot about how I think sponsorship need to evolve and change to fit kind of, today's demand. So you mentioned kind of a 3-step method for evaluating sponsorships. I think it's one thing for the associations and shows to offer the sponsorships. I think it's then on exhibitors and people who are paying to sponsor to understand how to evaluate and fold it into their overall strategy. So give us a little bit about your 3-step method.
So one of the things that you have to remember when you're talking sponsorships is that the way that I have talked to those exhibit companies, you're going to a ABC Con and the planners have sponsorships and they have the basic sponsorship package. Every time you're in Atlanta, they always have these packages. You can do this, that, and that. And they just kind of repeat it because it's easy for them to take what other people have done in the Atlanta, Georgia World Center and repeat it. So they just put it on repeat. But the 3 steps that I always encourage people to start with is what your goal is, what your budget is, and what your message is. You do that with everything. That's the way you're planning your booth, basically, too. So you need to decide what your goal is. And when you look at the goal, you need to also look at the audience, because if you're trying to speak to everybody, then maybe some of those big giant banners at the Georgia World Center make sense for you, but it might not make sense if you're only looking for specific customers. If I'm at a lab, my company does analytical equipment. If I'm at a crime con, when it's all the FBI and all of the different forensic people from around the country come and attend this fictional conference, and I only want to talk to the lab scientists that do dirt analysis, my goal is to find 20 dirt analyzing people. I don't want to spend a ton of money on the big splashy billboards and such. So my budget for a 10 by 10 booth is not covering that anyway. So I need to figure out what my message is. My audience, I've decided I want it to be, just people that analyze dirt samples. So I start looking for sponsorships that are going to talk to those people. A lot of times that specific option doesn't exist. Oftentimes it ends up being a email blast or a postcard I can send out or something like that. But sometimes you can take what already exists and modify it to work for you to get your message.
When you said 3 pieces of goal, budget, and message, right? I think I think the budget is a super obvious one. You can afford what you can afford, right? So you got to look at the menu and know, okay, this is where I'm at. But I really like the idea of looking at your message, right? That you're saying that, because I think most times I tell people all the time when they're going to a trade show in general, one of my biggest things is asking them, what do you want your customers to walk away knowing?
Yeah.
And that really should lead back to your message. That should build into your booth planning and everything. But I love that you're putting that in there with sponsorship, because if you have a message to a certain niche or broad audience, it does help you dial in. How could I get this message to them? Right? Like, is there a creative way to do this through what's being offered? And I think that's a really cool lens, you're looking through there.
And then I can, Matt, look at what hall is maybe the dirt scientists and the forensic scientists that are using lab equipment, their sessions are all down a hallway.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to do any messaging in the B and C hallway area because none of my scientists are going to be down there. I need to focus on where they're going to be.
Yeah. For anyone listening, like, it's being niche, it's being specific, it's being smart about, it's kind of like you use, it's a bad analogy if it's this, but it's like you don't really want a shotgun approach. You want like a sniper approach, right? Like you got one bullet, not 500 just to spray around. Right. And I I hate that that's the analogy. It makes sense whether you're, whatever.
Yeah, well,
But
it's
I
like
think
if
that
you
that's
had
how you
a
have to think about it.
if you had a tray of cupcakes, but someone was gluten sensitive, you would make their cupcakes separate.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm gonna make cupcakes for everybody because everybody's gonna visit the
Mhm.
booth, but I
Yeah.
know that my audience is gluten sensitive, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna special those
You,
cupcakes
yeah.
just for my audience, and then I'm gonna zhuzh it up. I'm gonna make it fancy
Yep.
for them. I'm gonna make sure they know, hey, I'm talking to you, gluten sensitive attendee, because I did these special for you. I got cupcakes for everybody, but I made
Yeah.
something special for you. So I might do a sponsorship that's branded, I might do a enhanced listing. Those are often affordable in my budget range. So I might do that because I want people to know we've never been to the crime people conference. So we want people to know that my company is at the crime conference. So I want to enhance the listing. And then once I have the messaging for my dirt analyzing people, then they can find me easily because I've got the messaging with the branding, and I hook it back to the enhanced listing stuff.
Yeah. I like the idea of being more specific and targeted when you're doing that. When I look at the description of the class, right, you talk a little bit about not just buying sponsorships, but you talk about adding value to
Yeah.
sponsorships, right? What do you mean by adding value to the sponsorship?
I tell you what, Matt, it was an aha moment during COVID shutdown and everything was virtual. We all remember it. And I was chasing my own tail, trying to figure out ways to connect with people. And one of the sponsorships that they offered was put your logo here on this page. Everything was virtual. So it was all about images and clicks and everything. And so I sent my logo, and then I refreshed my screen to see what people were doing, whose logo was already submitted. And I saw someone that had submitted not only their logo but a little call to action. Well, it wasn't a call to action, a little be sure that you ask about our ABC widget.
Yeah.
And I thought, why am I just sending them a logo? They just want a JPEG. They don't care if it's my logo in, 100% or if it's my logo and a call to action. So I started realizing that, especially on those things where the very minimum they want your logo, that's the first place you can start to add value. What is your messaging that you're going to have? Start considering adding that to your logo spot, because they don't care if it's your logo or if it's a JPEG of something else. They just want you to submit a JPEG.
How much adaptability do you think events are willing to allow in
It
terms of
depends what your budget
sponsorships?
will take.
But you
That's
can
when
ask,
you're,
right? I mean, you can ask,
yeah,
hey, can I do
yeah,
this? Like, I encourage our
absolutely.
clients all the time, like, ask,
Yeah,
can you
absolutely.
do this? I mean, why not?
And sometimes, Matt, they'd never even thought about it.
Mhm.
I'll say, well, can I do a standing sign? Oh, well, we've never thought about doing a standing sign. Well, I've already decided I need to be in hallway A for the dirt analyzing people.
Yeah.
So I need a standing sign in hallway A. And then I just have to mention, hey, can we do a standing sign or a stanchion at their water cooler or something? So I can reinforce that we're talking dirt in booth 123.
Yep.
And all you have to do is that asking thing. You have to be brave enough to ask. I know
Yeah.
people that are, if you're doing fight, flight, or freeze, I know people that would flight every time. I'm not
Yep.
asking. If it's not offered,
Yeah.
I'm not asking. Can I have an extra glass of water when I'm sitting down at the table? No, I am not asking. If they forget my water, I'm just going to not drink anything.
Yeah.
So they would not even dream of talking to the event planners about, could you offer something or would you consider offering something? Most times I get a yes, we haven't thought about it, or let me find out.
Yeah. I would encourage it. I mean, it makes me think of an idea, like a very common thing is to sponsor a lunch, right?
Yeah.
Where you can
Mhm.
sponsor a lunch. And to what we talked about earlier, if that lunch is specific to you, or you feel like your ICP, your client, your customer is in that lunch,
Yeah.
well, I would say, hey, we'll sponsor the lunch for X. Question: can I bring in a barista and do a coffee bar inside
Yes.
the lunch? Can I add, I'll
Yes.
pay for it. Can I
Yeah.
add to it? Because after lunch, a lot of people want coffee.
Yeah.
And then maybe you can have custom napkins or
Yes.
drink things that go around the
Yep.
coffee that
Yep.
have a message that go
Absolutely.
around it. So now you're
Yeah.
giving out your own custom coffee.
Yep.
It costs you more, but
Right.
you're bringing that value. Like there's so many different things where
Yeah.
you just, I would encourage people to think outside the box
Yeah.
because you
And
can
Matt,
ask,
a
never
lot of
hurts.
times when I'm at a small booth, the reason I have a small booth is not because my budget is small. It's just because the hall only has small booths.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
it's not a big event. If I'm going to a specific crime lab meeting on the East Coast and it's only crime directors from Massachusetts, that's not a big group of people. So I've
Yep.
got a small area. So I might be able to get budget if I'm decided, you know what, there are 10 key crime labs in the Massachusetts area that we need to get in front of. Let me sponsor that lunch. Let me bring in that barista. And like you said, all you have to do is ask. And the great thing about sponsoring a lunch or something is you can get creative. If you don't have barista money, you can say, can I supply the cups? And then do branded reusable cups.
Yeah.
Or can I supply bottles of water and do branded bottles of water? You know,
Yeah, I
something to
mean,
get in front of that customer base.
say a part of your message is sustainability, right?
Mhm.
Like, could you bring in, you'd say sustainable or green plates,
Mhm.
napkins, cups? Say, hey,
Yep.
can I bring these in? Can we have a message on them about
Yes.
sustainability? Like, you constantly have to think and constantly have to ask.
And the exhibit companies, you know, the people running the organizations running these events don't usually mind if you're solely sponsoring something for you to supply
Yeah.
paperware and other things. Oftentimes they'll say, bring in a flyer and leave a flyer. Well,
Mhm.
instead of a flyer, could I do a flash drive that has, all of my products listed on it or all of my information? A lot of times I'll just leave postcards at the spot and say, come to our booth for the XYZ premium,
Yeah.
and then I've got a way to scan their badge and hand them the XYZ premium.
If costs are going to continue to rise at some point, exhibitors or your conference people have to be able to go to the show and say, look, like we understand the costs have to increase, but also here's our side of things. Here's our data. Here's our information. Here's what we're getting or we are not getting. At the end of the day, a third-party conference, everybody needs the value, right? The sponsors, the exhibitors, the attendees. It's a big orchestration. I think as you move forward, and one of the main points that I keep touching on in the event space, and it's one of the things I love that what your company is doing is I feel like you're contributing to this, which is that everything has to get better. Everything has to get better. And everyone has to kick in to be, it's not just the exhibitors that have to measure themselves. It's the associations, right? It's the shows. It's people like me. I have to help our customer get there, find results, be better. It's everyone in the ecosystem can no longer be like, oh, events just happen. They just are. Oh, we've always gone, or it's always been this way. You hear that all the time, nonstop. And I think one of the things that, and I talked to you about this, makes me think is like, you go pre 2016, 15, the internet wasn't mature enough. People still needed these third party shows. They had to be there. They had to, because they didn't have the maturity of seamless AI, LinkedIn, these contact info, the ability to find contacts and get in front of the customer is so rampant now with Facebook, LinkedIn, all these softwares. It's changed. People don't need to attend the third party show that they used to. So I think it got a little lazy back in the day, right? The events, everyone there, and then companies had an excuse for not measuring. It was like, yeah, we have to be there anyway. And I don't think that urgency was placed on it.
Yeah, like, I tend to agree. I do think that a lot of companies do, and quite rightly believe that they do need to be at a lot of these third-party trade shows. While there's no doubt that the maturity of digital and all the online channels that we have has really come of age, and certainly when we look at the most of, in fact, all of these digital channels, they're so measurable. Like marketers can really prove
Yep.
ROI. Like
Yep.
it's table stakes stuff, right? But still, so many companies are rightly choosing to be in that live environment where they can affect more complicated conversations and tackle more, complicated challenges and build relationships and accelerate the decision-making process or relationship building or brand trust in a way that you just simply cannot do, even with these more mature digital channels than we had years ago. So I think that the business case and the rationale to exhibit or to run any in-person events activity as a communications tool has always been strong and remains strong by comparison to the alternatives. But the challenge is how over the coming years, as costs increase, and as other factors like the measurability of other channels. And the other point that you made when you were introducing the session on the back of our previous conversations was the carbon situation. And that's I think that's a really interesting one, because I wouldn't mind betting that a lot of people that are on this webinar today and a lot of people that will be watching it afterwards are not today experiencing any real pressure that is impacting their choice as to whether or not to run an event or whether or not to exhibit at an event that is coming from a carbon consumption standpoint. And that's one of the things that I think we have to have a real conversation about, because what we're experiencing today is not indicative of where we'll be in 3 years' time. And there's a number of factors that underpin that.
I think the forward thinking on that is good. I'd love to hear those factors or what you think they are. From my seat, what I've seen is that when you don't have economical or geopolitical or, issues that take center stage, like the last 6 months to 12 months, inflation took center stage. You know what I mean? It was the only thing. No one was talking about the carbon footprint of events. No one was talking about sustainability. Some were, but I think what ends up happening in the event business that I've seen is that people put things off to the side just to get it done in the moment, right? Because it's what they're focused on in the moment is that inflation, that price increase. But then everything starts to compress and pile up. For the same example, that the same problems the event industry had in 17, 18, 19, we still have now. We still have them. If you go back to 2017, look at all the reports, you do the data, right? You do the research, you talk to attendees, exhibitors, all that, or any of the reports that I get, the same problems, the same graphs, the same line items exist now that existed back then. So it begs the question, when you come to a carbon thing, at some point, when are people going to start to make real moves? Because eventually what's going to happen is carbon will take center stage. Then executives and shareholders will put the pressure downward about it because they got to be front and center of it. So now event marketers, CMOs, they're going to be dealing with, oh shit, inflation, right? We never really solved this problem. We're not measuring our results. We don't know if these shows are drawing a big return. Oh, now we have to be sustainable in every single thing that we do with events. Oh my God, right? And it just starts to compound.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you make a really good observation around how sort of myopically we focus on, the biggest problem that's right in front of us now. And that's kind of, I think, a pretty normal thing that most people do in most industries or most people do in life. But it doesn't mean the other problems are going away. And in the same way that the cost line is only going up for this industry, the carbon ship has sailed. I don't believe that in my lifetime, we're ever going to see a time where the pressure to reduce carbon emissions reduces or levels out even. Like, it's only ever likely to increase. And that might sound
there's too many unsolved problems, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
There's just too many other unsolved problems to get to that one. It's never going to warrant,
this is the big existential one that we all have a very, very big stake in, that ultimately trumps everything, right? And it does sound dramatic when you talk about it from where we are today, because, we're still able to run events without a great deal of sort of carbon filter, if you like. Like, does the event meet certain carbon characteristics? Great, it does. You can run it. Does the event prove its value? Great, you can run it. I think when you look at the variables, and I've spent a little bit of time, I am, in the research industry by background, so I've spent some time looking at this. But certainly, the frequency of adverse weather events is increasing. And then with that, the media attention on climate change is continually increasing. And we are seeing, and you can easily observe the shift in societal pressure around the expectations on corporate conduct in the area of sustainability. And with this, over the last few years, most large corporates have made some hard commitments for 2030 in line with their sort of net zero initiatives. And so those are hard commitments to the public, to their customers, to their shareholders that are in the public domain. And it's a matter of brand integrity that those commitments are met. And 2030 is looming closer every quarter that passes. So it is a concern. And like, for me, like when you think about where the real power lies in large corporations, of course, the real power lies at the top. And you think about where's the real pressure on the C-suite where it comes to carbon, and it comes from customers and their expectations, and it particularly comes from shareholders. And so I did a little bit of work, and this is public domain data. You can look it up yourself, but S&P Global studied the number of shareholder activism campaigns. And if you look back at the last 3-4 years, the number of those shareholder activism campaigns where shareholders are directly lobbying the management of the businesses in which they're invested to affect a change. But the number of those campaigns that are environmental by nature has dramatically increased. It's probably one of the, if not the fastest growing areas of shareholder pressure that large corporations are facing. And if you run the trend line forward, looking year on year as to the number of those shareholder campaigns, then it's predictable that even if the trend is linear, that over the next, let's say 3 to 4 years, there's going to be thousands of shareholder campaigns that the C-suite of large corporations are going to be facing, putting them under increasing pressure to cut their carbon emissions and to change the way in which they behave. And so
it's going to catch us.
Yeah. I don't think anyone can escape this either. There's no corporate of any power that is impervious to this. Just recently, Amazon got terrible press for not meeting their commitments in line with SBTI, which they were one of the early adopters of the science-based targets initiatives. And so, nobody's beyond this as a challenge. And I think it is there's no doubt that senior stakeholders in large corporates love their events, but they love their shareholder relations and their share price more. And that, of course, that directly impacts the, commercial and strategic strength of their position in the business.
Mark, I want to zoom out a little bit, right? We kind of talked about, recap, like cost, carbon, right? Because we said it's one of the highest expenses in the marketing line item, right? And then in terms of carbon footprint as well, largest. What I want to talk a little bit right now, I want to move into is the measuring part, that it's least measured, right? So from a business standpoint, when something is a high cost, it ought to be one of the most measured, right? And events is just the opposite. So I think if we're talking about actionable items for people here, say you are a corporate event marketer working for a company, I would be having conversations now about how you reduce your carbon footprint as an exhibitor, right? Talk to your partners, talk to people. How do you build a plan? We've done them for our customers. They have asked, hey, can you build us a report? Where are we currently being green? Where are we not? Where can we be better? Be prepared. Don't wait for shareholders and executives and things to come rifling down to you. Get ahead of the curve. There are very simple things and very easy things you can do to have to be more green at your events and at your trade shows now, so you're prepared for what Mark and I are kind of talking about, which I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it will. Now, this next piece, I think, is the second one, Mark, which is the measure of all this. We're saying that high cost, big carbon footprint creates questions around events. Why are we going? What are the results we get? Is it worth our time, energy, effort? What's the point of these? Oh, we go because we always go. We don't really get results. I mean, I've heard it forever, on and on about events being questioned. Somehow they still make it. Somehow they're still there. I think they drive tremendous value, which we can dive into. But let's talk a little bit about being able to measure, being able to build a business case, being able to get executive buy-in because you are measuring and utilizing your events to further push company objectives and goals.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the three things sit together. Like, I don't see a situation where a corporate can exhibit at a trade show and there not be a carbon impact, right? Because so much of the carbon impact is from the travel, that that's the air travel in particular, and the hotel stay is associated, right? The reality is that that's not going away. And if you imagine, the graph moving forward in terms of cost pressure and carbon pressure, we are, a perfect storm is brewing around the
Going like
disruption
this, yes.
of the events
Yes.
industry. And the antidote to that is prove the value, right? Because, there's only an extent to which you can mitigate and reduce the carbon impact of any exercise you do. And of course, there's a moral obligation, and quite rightly, we should be doing everything we can to reduce that carbon impact. But what's the business case? That's what it ultimately comes down to. And I seriously fear that if in 3 years' time, we are the least measured or the least measurable channel amongst all the channels that are increasingly more measurable, whilst we're also the most expensive and the most carbon consuming, we are a sitting duck for disruptions. So yeah, it comes down to how are you going to measure and how you make that, like, the conversation is around what is proof? What is proof to the stakeholders that need that evidence? And what's the best approach to being able to consistently justify the case for whatever event activity that you undertake?
One thing I did want to bring up is I do think as we get into this ROI, this measurement conversation, right, which Mark has a ton of experience with, something that I've been thinking about that I want to relay really quickly is that I think you just say, hey, what's the ROI? It becomes this daunting idea of how to do it. How I think, what are we measuring? Why are we measuring it? All those things take experience. It's not simple, right? So we don't want to make it sound simple. One thing that I have been thinking about is how do events impact a company, right? I think you need to understand that for your company first, right? Is it net new business? Is it customer resurgence, right? Are you having discussions on the show floor at a conference with a customer that has been a customer on and off for years, or maybe their spend is little? You do a dinner, they come to the booth, you show them something new, you have a new contact. All these things happen at events, and then their spend goes up, right? Do you have deal stage acceleration? So do you have deals that are just actively moving through your stages quicker because of a touch point at event? That tells me that you probably have to tag deals, meaning that you had a touch point at an event. It doesn't mean it's the lead source, but it means that you had some kind of tagging at an event. I say something like stage one unlock. You have a lot of companies that get a lot of general marketing leads that go into a bit of a stage one, or they just come in. But are those people at the shows? Are you unlocking them by having conversations, going to a dinner, being at your booth, being in an activity, whatever it may be? I think you have to start to understand what are you doing at your events, because not everybody does the same thing, but these are sort of the happenings that are going on. This is like the inertia, the things that are happening that create the impact that then has to be measured to create that ROI.